Hello, everyone. My name is Jillian Holmberg. I am the children's librarian here at the McAuliffe Library with Framingham Public Library. So tonight we're going to be doing our expanded genealogy program. We do have one more in this series, which at the end of our program we'll be getting to. So just to let you know, some of the things we're going to cover in this program is how to find Ancestry through the Framingham Public Library website, the basic layout of how to use Ancestry, a quick before you begin, and a quick review of what we covered in our beginner's genealogy. We also have that YouTube recording up on our YouTube page. And then for the new things that we're getting into for this program tonight are finding ancestors born in other countries, immigration ports used in America, citizenship, women's genealogy, and preserving history and memories without using digital platforms such as Ancestry or MyHeritage, where you record, where you put everything digitally. And then reliability of word of mouth family stories. And then lastly, I have some information and resources and links I'm going to be giving to everyone. And then how to save the information that you get from ancestry.com. So finding Ancestry through the Framingham Public Library. So hopefully a lot of you are familiar with our website. So what we're going to do, sorry, I have 15 different tabs open. I'm going to go to the Framingham Public Library website. So you're going to go to Find Online, and then under Research Resources, find the best way to find it is A through Z. Ancestry is at the beginning of the alphabet, so it makes it faster to find. You're going to scroll down until you get to Ancestry Library. When you click on that, it's going to prompt you, well, I've already logged in, but it's going to prompt you to enter in your library card number. So it's the full number, no spaces. And one of the great things is that usually Ancestry is used at the Framingham Library through our own computers, and you don't need to put in your enter in your library card because it's an online resource with us. Because of the pandemic, they've allowed it and changed it so that we can have every one of our patrons access it from home. So what you'll do is just enter in the library card number, and you can even save the information from home. Before, it used to be just at the library. This is going to continue until December of this year. Then they plan on changing it back, where in order to save the information, you have to physically be at the library. So keep that in mind as you go through your Ancestry. So we are going to go to our next thing. So building your family tree. So I kind of covered this a little bit in our last one, but I kind of want to reiterate it for everyone. So before you begin, you guys really need to set your goals. Are there any other family members helping you? In the handouts that we emailed today, I think there were 7 of them. There are various handouts that you can use digitally or you can print them, and they'll help you organize all the information that you're going to be researching. One of the things that we do recommend is, what do you know? The key thing to Ancestry and genealogy is start with what you know, work with the living, and then work your way backwards. And that's going to be definitely important when we go for certificates like birth certificates, marriage, death of ancestors in other countries. So as you find out, is anyone helping you in your family, or maybe you're just doing this by yourself, find out who knows what stories, who knows anything. Even if it's a rumor, it's a great thing to remember, and then you can research that later to see if it's true or not. And lastly, always keep in mind all the rumors, passed down stories, and any facts that you've heard. As I mentioned in my previous program, my aunt swears we're from Swedish royalty, and I've disproved that, and she is not happy about it, but she always said that was a family story passed down, and I disproved that. Unfortunately, I'd love to be royalty, but it always is a great place to start, because I definitely knew, well, I got to look at that country. So a quick review of one of the things we covered last one is the basic functions and searches of Ancestry. We'll hop back to the Ancestry website after this. One of them is record searching, so how to find the different things like military, immigration, marriage, birth, death, and then saving information to your own personal devices. So again, I put a reminder here, it's December 2021, so this year is you'll have to be using the library's Ancestry again. And as a reminder, if you have not seen the beginner's genealogy, we have it on our website. You can go through the YouTube channel, or you can go directly to YouTube, type in Framingham Public Library, and we do have a genealogy section on there. So getting started with finding ancestors born in another country. So as I mentioned, it's always best practice to move backwards. Start with what you know and then continue. You're not just going to go immediately to, your 8th removed great aunt. You're going to start with you, then your parents, grandparents, and keep going. Census records are going to be your best friend in finding all this information. As census records, you'll notice that they're done in different increments. They're not done every single year. So the great thing is you can see the general age of what the person's believed to be. It's always within a year or so. Most records will say, what is your age by the end of this year? Keep that in mind. I found a lot of times where the person put their current age, not the age they're turning by the end of the year. So that always gives you 1 year of a wiggle date if you're going from that. Another great thing is you can see who's living in that household. It could be an aunt, it could be a grandparent, it could even say family friend. And then it will also list, all the children in that household, anyone. Another thing is to check the country's vital records. In a lot of European countries, they're called civil registrations. So if you're finding not much, try using the word civil registrations through the government websites. But one of the important things is a lot of European countries, a lot of those birth certificates are going to be found through churches or the local town halls. So, and then one of the things, I'm going to mention DNA kits throughout this just a tiny bit, but it's the next course that we're doing in October. We will be focusing on DNA kits. So if you have more questions, please save them until that program, or we did put in the chat box a survey, and we would love to hear what you want to see in that next one. We are covering DNA kits, so if you have questions specific to that, please include that in the chat, and then that way we can have that for the next program. So through matches on family tree sites or through DNA kits, you can connect with living family in other countries. A lot of countries will say, well, we can't give you that record because you're either so many generations removed, or usually it's 3, or you are not a citizen of that country. So one of the great things is through your matches, if you do find people on Ancestry or other sites and through the DNA kits, is that if someone lives in another country and you reach out to them, they might already have the records and you can share. This is kind of getting back to if you know anyone else in your family who is doing research, definitely combine your resources. It'll help you in the long run. I happened to find a match of a great-great-grandparent, and it was a DNA match of this man's wife. Him and his wife are doing the DNA research, and they still live in Sweden. Thankfully, they speak English because I do not speak Swedish. And through that, I was able to say, I don't get access to Swedish records. What can you give me? They were able to give me about a dozen records, and they were able to get them no problem. They still live in the same county our great-great and grandparents still they came from, they lived in. It was fantastic. It's a great thing that they can also take photos and be like, that's where they used to live, in that house, and it gives you more of a connection. I know not everyone's as lucky to have living relatives in other countries, especially if it's so many generations removed of when they came over to America. Another thing is I found people in Ireland. I'm friends with them on Facebook. It's kind of a great thing, but it's nothing because they constantly go, hey, how do I get this record in America? And I go, well, if you get me this Ireland record, please do that, and we'll just swap them back and forth. So another thing I want to point out is some birth registrations go unregistered. Unfortunately, UNICEF estimates about 1/4 of children under 5 in the world are unregistered for birth certificates. It is unfortunate, but one of the main things to think about is if you are from a certain country in the world, think about what the time period was like. Was there, conflict, war, political unrest, whether the areas, they believe in naming ceremonies or their cultural beliefs. Some people will either wait until a child's a certain age before they register, or they won't register at all. I mean, think about if you're in the middle of a war-torn country, you might not think, oh, just had a baby, let me do all the proper paperwork. It's not going to be the first thing on your mind. It is really unfortunate that makes it difficult in some countries to find them. But eventually you'll get there. They'll be able to find other methods. I do recommend if there's a certain country that's not European, there are some resources online. You just need to be specific about that country or a county or a city within that country. So one example I wanted to show here is that, actually, we're going to go back to Ancestry. So on this main part, most of the functions you'll be using are under search here at the top. You have all categories, census and voter lists, birth, marriage, death, military, immigration and travel, and card catalog. If you are looking for anything, please do all categories. If you're looking for something specific, it will help you save a lot of time if you select the exact one. So what we're going to do is click on birth, marriage, and death, because I'm going to show you two examples of a birth and marriage certificate. So I'm just going to enter the information. All right, so we're going to type in example. This is a great ancestor of mine. So if you guys, I know you're watching the PowerPoint, but always think in mind if there's someone specific you want. I know it's always fun to start with someone you want to really find in the ancestry record instead of just going, parents, great-grandparents, and on. But if you feel confident going back, 3 generations, just jump right in there. So we are going to see. So we're going all the way back to the 1800s. And the great thing is that a lot of the locations will pre-fill in because my keyboard does not have some of the special letters used in the Swedish language. We are going to try this search. All right, so as you'll see on the left side, you can do the search filters. If you definitely know, yes, this is their last name, without a doubt, it's their last name and it's the correct spelling, put that on exact. It can cut down between, 2,400 to, let's see. Oh, well, not too much, 2,300, but that's just for last name. But if you know this area and region, on the bottom left, you'll see filter by. So we chose birth, marriage, and death. If we wanted one of those 3 and we were specific, you can click on those. I'm going to be clicking on birth. I believe this is one from earlier. So you'll notice this is one of the examples I like to use. It says no image, text only collection. It is exciting to be able to get the image because one of the main things with genealogy is you need the proof, you need the connection of where you found this, you need the sources. That is, if you don't have a source, it's not 100% that is information that you have. It's all about the sources. So there are more data available, and if you click on other sites, it will take you to usually that country's website. Always, I recommend Google Chrome because then it can translate for you. Oh, sorry, my light just turned off. All right, so we're going to go back to try another result, but this time it's going to show you. It's going to show you an image. Sorry, my computer's a little slow today. So let's see. So I had put in, so the reason why I chose that ancestor is because his wife, my great-great-grandmother, so she actually has gone by 2 different names. All her documents containing her are 100% legitimate, but they do have different spellings of her first and middle name. It's not a great thing to have, but especially back then, it was a little easier to get away with it. Nowadays, you put even like a extra space, and they'll be like, "Nope, that's not the right document." So we're actually going to put in Katharina instead of Katerina. Katrina, sorry. So another thing is when you're looking up women, and I will get to women's genealogy later, is on birth certificates. Even if they're married, when you're, by the time you're looking them up, put in their birth last name. That is the important, the woman's birth last name. You can always change and add an event saying, marriage and then name change. But you'll find your information much, much faster by doing her name. So let's see, so she was born on 12th. Another thing to keep in mind as you look through the records in a lot of other countries, just they have it as, instead of month, day, year, it's day, month, year. So that can be tricky, especially, if it says, it's a single digit month instead of, 11 or 12. April 1830. So now that we have her, you'll notice on the right side, this actually has Katharina, and then the original one I had put in Katrina. So all of these, as I've looked up, are the same person, unfortunately. It's just, it happens to be recorded differently, whether it's a nickname or not. So when you view the records, you do have the option to save the information on the right side. Remember, as I said, if you are from home, it's great, but after December, you are going to have to either, we have how to save from the library, just so you know how to save those records for your own self. At the very bottom, it has this great feature where you can click on it and it can translate for you if it's in another language. But what's great is they've had all these people scan these records and type them out for you where you know exactly how it's spelled. Personally, I cannot read cursive for the life of me. So this is, wonderful. So you'll see the name at the bottom. It says the gender. It does translate the Swedish into English, and it says resident at, so it starts with her father. That is the important thing, especially because it's a woman. So as it goes through her spouse and then her father. So it's the father listed first. The mother is listed way at the end. Fortunately, that's the woman's genealogy for you. So sometimes if you're struggling finding a woman, if you happen to know the spouse or the father, especially if the spouse was a male, it'll be a much easier time finding them. So back, can you guys see the presentation again? Or is it?
Yes, we can see it.
We
Thank
can
you.
see
Okay,
it.
good. I was gonna have to reshare. Okay. So this is exactly what we just saw, and it has it highlighted. So each country, the records look a little differently. I know if you go far back in Russia, a lot of them kind of look like the size and shape of a passport. So each, whether it's a vital record, a birth certificate, or a civil registration, each country's is going to look a little bit different. Some might just have them listed like this, and this is how they found them in, a church book. Some might have, official certification, or it will look like a passport. So if you always go, oh, mine doesn't look like that, that's perfectly fine. Every country is different. Every time period within the same country is going to look different. But speaking of birth certificates, sometimes you have to, go kind of forward in order to go backwards. If you know they immigrated, especially to America, we're focusing the presentation of immigration to America, not to other countries, because most people that have attended our programs express interest in, coming to America for covering this. So if you do not know what country they came from, if you can at least find their immigration records, it gives you a start. So one of the things is what drove them to come to America, what made them come to another country. One of the main things is world events that made them move. I mentioned the potato famine, even the gold rush, whether also it was a war or a political unrest. There's so many reasons why they could have come over. If you have a rough idea of the time period, that's also a great thing. And then one of the things I wanted to point out, because we are in Massachusetts, despite deep colonial roots, Boston was not a popular direct choice for immigrants. Most people will go, oh yeah, my immigrants came through Boston. It's like, are you sure? So passage through Canada was much cheaper to go from there and then into Boston than it was to come to Boston. So if you happen to be from Massachusetts and you have some Irish in you, look in some Canadian ports. You might find more ancestors through there. Another tip is that sorry, can't talk. Naturalization records are often more than one page long. As I've done all these years of research, I've found that sometimes people will only upload the first page. So make sure if you're looking at them, you're getting the full document. Otherwise, you could be missing crucial information. So one of the things I wanted to mention with the Canadian side into Boston is that so my great-grandfather, he came from Sweden when he was 14. He actually legally snuck aboard a steamship, went to Canada, snuck off. There's no record of his passage over. And then he came to America, met a woman and was like, hey, want to marry me? Can I get citizenship? And that's how he came over. So the first record that I have of him is his marriage certificate in America. There's no record of him in Canada at all. And it wasn't until we found family photographs and then we were able to kind of confirm the passed on family story of, yeah, that's actually what he did. And then with the family I mentioned that is still in Sweden, they were able to go, and one of them actually had a notebook from the mother of him that said he ran off at this age 14, to saying he was going to go make it to America some way or another. So we were able to, without official records of immigration and travel, we were able to piece together what happened. We got extremely lucky having, you know, people with the notebooks and with all these photographs that have been passed on. But I had not in a million years considered Canada as an option. So immigration through America. So I'm not going to read this whole next few slides, but I did want to point out a few different things of a timeline of immigration to America. We are going to be sending you guys a PDF of this PowerPoint at the end. So if you're taking notes, feel free to not write all of this down because you will be getting a copy after. But these are a few big moments through American history that affected immigration into America. I did want to do some notable ones that happened in 1815, 1880, and 1907. So in 1815, one of the main things on here is that peace was reestablished between the US and Britain after the War of 1812. So that influenced immigration from just a little bit of people coming over to a lot. So it was a lot of people that came over. And I know a lot of people, especially in New England, tend to have roots in, you know, the UK. That's just one of the things to look for. Like I said, world events that happened are the biggest influences in your family's history. So the other event that I mentioned was as we go through. So another thing is, so Ellis Island is one of the more well-known immigration ports. If you haven't been, it is a wonderful experience, and I hope you guys all get to go if you're researching your family. But in 1907, the US immigration has peaked and 1.3 million entered through Ellis Island alone. So in the next few slides, I'm going to get to the other 5 major ports that people came through to America. But we have also included links at the end of this presentation of a list of every single US port between a certain time period that people came over. So if you are finding that, you know, oh, they came through Louisiana, we got you covered. And then another one is, so we have in the immigration ports. So they were New York, Boston, Baltimore, Philadelphia, and New Orleans. Do we have anyone here tonight that knows their family came from somewhere else other than New York or Boston if they immigrated over?
Well, I had some from Canada.
Canada?
I don't know if you were asking for that, but
yeah, like I said, you know, Canada was another big port, especially for you know, Irish and people who came through Boston. Yes.
So I believe my great grandfather came through Philadelphia, although we're not completely positive, because he on census records he tended to change his name. I don't know if he was trying to hide from somebody. Mm-hmm. But yeah,
that could always be a thing, you know, if you're hiding from the law or hiding from someone. Yeah. So this is the link here as well. Oh, sorry, click on the wrong thing. The U.S. ports and their arrival. It's through 1820 and 1957. Those were the peak years for immigration. So I'm sure we have some people attending who go, oh, my family's been here for like 100 years, 200. And there's probably some people that go, my family has not actually been here that long. And that's perfectly fine. So there's a big range for that. Nowadays, if you're looking for an ancestor, who came over 20, 30 years ago, it's much easier, especially with the digital age and computers from, more recent on. Ironically, I know we're all sick of hearing about quarantine, but prior to July 1855, there was actually processing stations where health officials screened them and asked if they were infected with infectious diseases, and all the passenger and crew were sent to a quarantine area on Staten Island. And this is actually common. A few other ports also have this. I know New Orleans had one as well, and they would make sure that everyone was healthy before they came into the United States. So one of the things I mentioned, illegal entry, that's always hard when you're doing family research, because like I mentioned with my ancestor, there isn't a physical, stamped passport of entry, which is sometimes what we want. We want to see that, physical document, but sometimes it's just not there. And unfortunately, it's one of the things just to accept. Another is passenger arrival list. Sometimes if you're saying, oh, I'm looking at this port, if you use this term passenger arrival list, it will come up with more lesser known and smaller ports. It's not often, like I said, not everyone came through Ellis Island. There's many other ones along the eastern coast as well, and like the Carolinas and down by Georgia. The most popular ports I've listed here, these are the ones in New York. There's 2 in New York. There's one in Pennsylvania, Baltimore, and Ohio railroad. Most people don't think of railroads. They just think, oh, yep, some steamship brought everyone over. But there's other ways that you can travel to get to America during this time. And then obviously, we got New Orleans, included a photo down there. It's amazing to think of how these ports looked compared to what we have nowadays. So with our citizenships, it's kind of moving on. So once families immigrated through these ports, usually citizenship is the next record. One of the main things I want to remind everyone is, depending on certain years, some people weren't granted citizenship in America, which is really unfortunate. So Native Americans, they weren't actually granted until lights went out again. Native Americans weren't granted citizenship in the United States until 1924, which that's a whole can of worms to get me annoyed. Even though they've been here longer. So if you are descended from ancestors who are Native Americans, you have to go from that time period on of if you wanted official documentation. African Americans weren't allowed citizenship until the 14th Amendment was ratified, and that was in the late 1800s as well. So unfortunately, those are 2 marginalized groups that you have to look at those specific years and after for citizenship. Another thing is, in 1795, they increased the period of residency from 2 to 5 years. So before, you could just come over to America and be here for 2 years, and then you were granted citizenship. They had changed it to 5 years. On some of them, you'll find that they say you also had to be of good character, and then people had to say, yep, they're a great person, they should get citizenship, and that's all it took. There wasn't, a big fancy test that they had to do today and study for and practice. So some things on one hand were a little bit easier. At the same time, it's a little more complicated. But I did include a link to naturalization records for you if you would like. It's a great way to get those citizen test records. I tried to find a copy. I actually had a great-grandmother who got naturalized, but I couldn't find her official form. Turns out I never digitized it, so it's at home in a nice little acid-free binder, which is one thing I'll get to later, but preserving family history that is not digital. So women's genealogy, mentioning that grandmother. So unfortunately, history has not been friendly to women, and so last name changes are the biggest struggle that you're going to face. As I mentioned earlier, if you're looking for birth certificates, you really need to put her maiden name. If she did change her name, which chances are she did, because nowadays it's more common for women to go, I'm keeping my last name, but back then they didn't really have a choice. You'll also expect that their names aren't going to be on many documents, such as land deeds and wills, because they could not legally own much back then. You would often see their names on, their birth, marriage, and death, but it was really the marriage and all the birth certificates where they would be listed as the mother. Unfortunately, that's really all that women were seen as, having their names listed on as like ownership of the children and that they were married off to a man. It was only in 1900 that every US state had given married women control over their property and land deeds. So if you're looking for something specific of an ancestor who did reside in America after 1900, you will have a little bit easier time if they happen to be able to even afford owning property, or they were inherited it where it didn't go to a brother or a grandson or some uncle. And another thing is women could not vote until 1920. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with last year. There was a lot of big celebration of women with the 100-year anniversary of voting. So when you're looking at women's genealogy, I do recommend this source. It's called The Hidden Half of the Family. It's a book we do have here at the Minuteman catalog. I don't know if we have it at Framingham, but it's wonderful if you're struggling with women's genealogy and the women in your family. A lot of the people I have talked to over the years have struggled with women, or it's easier to do the men's side. And you'll find that if you look at people's trees, it's more populated with men than it is women, because they'll just go, I don't want to deal with that struggle right now of all that extra research. So they'll put it on the back burner, and then it just kind of sits there. So try not to let that happen, because it is a great resource to know where the women came from. So as I mentioned, women, it was really just their names on the birth, marriage, and death certificates. But eventually women were able to go into the workforce much easier. And then cities were distributing female specific business directories. Usually a lot of those jobs tend to be secretaries, or, working with, like phones, and very similar type of jobs. It wasn't too much. But sometimes you can still find digitized versions, especially if you go to the Library of Congress, their photo collection. You will be able to find, if you had an idea of if they worked, you'll be able to find their names in that record. And that gives you kind of an idea of what kind of jobs they led. Were they able to even get a job? And then unfortunately, insane asylum records are actually a really good resource for women's genealogy, because a lot of women, they would just say, oh, she's not having period cramps. That's not a real thing. Let's just put her in the, asylum, and she'll get fixed, and then she'll come out. So a lot of women actually pass through different asylum records, whether in European countries or in American countries, for even the littlest things. So a lot of them have been renamed since, or they might have been shut down. So if you happen to know, this region, we had a lot of family that stayed here for, 100, 200 years. If you have a feeling that, maybe you want to try one of those, try the history of how the building was named. It does change names a lot more than you would expect, and you would have to look up those records. But oftentimes they have been digitized in the most recent, if that town or city has a historic record, or if they have, historical society. Another thing is newspaper mentions. Women were usually only mentioned in the newspaper for their marriage, engagement, or marriage. So another thing, back to being married off to a guy. So sometimes you'll find in, like you have newspapers that have gone back, they've been around forever, New York Times, Boston Globe, you might be able to find newspaper mentions of women in there. Another thing is if you suspect that your ancestor was a part of like the war effort, there is Ancestry American Red Cross nurse files. So you have to go through this link on Ancestry. Otherwise, it's very difficult to find, but you'll be able to find women in wartime, and it's fantastic. Usually it's just nurse files or ambulance drivers. It's kind of what the main jobs of what women did in wartime. And then lastly is female clubs, organizations, and sisterhoods. They actually kept a very thorough record of all the people who participated or who were a part of those clubs. And that's great for us. Granted, it only tells you more of their social activities, or it'll, once again, mention a marriage. But some of them are the National Association of Colored Women, various sororities. A note on that one, the word sorority wasn't invented until about the late 1800s, early 1900s. So some sororities prior to then were actually called women's fraternities. So you might want to use that language if you are looking further back. And then another is local women's church groups. So my thesis project, I actually worked with this one city who didn't have a historical society, and I went through their church, who was 200 years old at the time, all their records, and we were able to find a bunch of women's church groups of various different levels, of how, well off you were working with the church and what you did for the church and what you donated for the church. And then they had different aspects of it, whether it was like charitable work or donation or the food pantry. And they listed all the women. Unfortunately, in that instance, 98% of the women were mentioned as, for example, it was Mrs. John Doe. And then you go, but what was her name? It's not mentioned, it's Mrs. John Doe. So you have the man's name, you don't have the woman's name. But oftentimes, if it's more of like the National Association or sororities, you will find the woman's full name and her, first name included. A lot of the church groups, you may only find the Mrs. husband's name. But at least it will get you the town that they were a part of, that they were active in their local area, and then you also get a last name and a time frame. So one of the things we're going to get to is that preserving history and memories without Ancestry. So a lot of the times you're going to be collecting all these records from Ancestry. If you choose not to get a paid, subscription to actually use the website, that's perfectly fine, but you are going to need to find a way to preserve all of these records. So one thing we recommend is if you have a nice, storage area on your computer, create folders per family branches for different time periods or events or census records, birth, marriage, death certificates. And then as you save them as a detail of who the person was and the year. But on the other end, you also have all those printed ones. You may have your own physical, birth certificate, or, maybe you have a high school diploma or college degree, or even all the physical photographs. So I recommend preserving them. If you get binders or sleeves or photo albums, use acid-free. If you want to look for that, that's actually a museum quality standard, and it doesn't damage the photographs in the long run. You will find that if you inherited photographs, you may find that they were just pasted right to the, photo album, and then you're going to be ripping them off, and it rips off because on the back is where they wrote the information. That's a little more tricky, but just be gentle removing those, or do the best that you can. Another thing is videos. I know a lot of you guys probably have family recordings, whether it's holidays or trips or apple picking. You have them on VHSs or old-fashioned kind of tapes, not the digitalized cell phone or even a DVD. What I recommend is getting those digitized as soon as possible. One example is we just did my parents' 30th anniversary wedding tape. The VHS was so degraded that the quality was so bad, and that was only 30 years time. So you can only imagine if you have a VHS from 40, 50 years ago, the quality is not going to be great. So do that while you can, so at least you preserve the family records for future descendants to come. And as we have the digital age of photos and videos, as I say, back them up. Right now, well, not right now, you're in the program, but when you get out of the program, just back everything up on your camera, your phone. You'd be amazed at how many photos you take that no one prints photos anymore. Probably, I print my photos still. I don't know if anyone still prints photos. Show of hands, some of you, none of you. No, it's all on the cell phone, and that's the thing. It's going to be hard where you're showing your grandkids, be like, hey, look at this photo, and it's on a cell phone instead of the physical one. So what I always say is digitize them, back them up. If there's some important to you, print them out, because you never know if your computer or your phone just dies and then you just lose all of them. There is the cloud, there is Drive, there are plenty of options. Another thing is I want to mention is there's a new trend with preserving family history, and it's a video family tree. So what you do is throughout family events or family holidays or gatherings, or even if it's just you recording yourself on your laptop, kind of like this, it's talking about family things. What do you know? And just verbally telling an oral history of your family. And you record them in segments, whether you talk about, these are all the stories I have about this person, or these are all the stories I have about Christmases in general, or birthdays in general, or things like that. And then that way people are sharing those, because as people unfortunately, pass away, or as you have, grandkids, or if they're now having grandkids, then you're able to share those memories of a person. So that's kind of a trend, which I think is really exciting for family history. It's not something that you're going to see on Ancestry, because that's more document based and photo based, but it is a great thing to have, because who wouldn't love to, 80 years from now, find a video of their, great great grandparent just talking about some random stuff. So the other thing I want to get to is liability of family stories. I did mention I have an aunt who, swears with Swedish royalty. She still says that, even though I've told her many years, we're not. But ask your family what they know or what they think they know. You will be amazed at the stories you will hear or the things you will get. And then at least it gives you somewhere to work on. If you've already done the basics of your family tree and you don't know what to do next, maybe it's time to investigate some of these stories. So they're kind of a stepping stone to get you in the right direction, even if they're not being true. One of the things I like, so it's this on Family Search is one of the ones I also recommend. It is free and you don't need to use a library card, or you don't have to go to the library to use this. But they have this great article on how family stories shape our identities. And I think that's fantastic because a lot of you guys probably don't realize how often you will say family stories or pass down, oral stories. I'm sure if you guys think there's sure you guys have a family story that every couple of years or maybe every family event people go, hey, remember this? That's a family story that's being passed down. And one of the things that it shapes the identity, and having that sense of identity of an ancestor who is no longer around can actually help you find records about that person. So one example I love to use is that I didn't really get to know my father's parents, but I always found out that they loved dancing. Fridays, oh, of course the lights going out again, sitting still. So Fridays were dance nights. So what happened is they would rush home from work, feed the kids hot dogs and beans and go, we're going dancing, you guys are fine, go to bed for the night. And they would go off dancing and they would dance the night away. And this was in the 50s and 60s, and they just loved to dance. So after hearing that, I thought, two things. One, well, this is fantastic. Like, now I know that they went to these dance places. I looked up dance cards, like historical records of dance cards in that area. I actually found a card that they used to use for membership for dancing every Friday night. I would never have found that if I didn't know that family story that was passed down to me. And the second thing is I found out that's why my dad refuses to eat hot dogs and beans. I've never in my life seen him eat that, but I had never known that until he told me the story. And I go, well, that all makes sense, because I would have, passed on to my kids, go, yeah, I never saw your dad eat hot dogs and beans, and I have no idea why. And they would go, your dad was weird. And I'd be like, yeah, but now I can say it's because his parents loved dancing so much. And that was their one night a week that they got to spend time with each other. And it gives them more of a personality of people that, I never met. But now I have that story that I can pass on. And then that you have that, oral family history that's shaped the identity of a deceased relative that you've never met. So as you find, whether you found a woman that was part of this society or this church group, you can go, wow, she loved doing this, charitable work. She loved working with a food pantry. And then maybe that leads to you finding out she loved cooking or something. There's so many things that you don't know, you can find when you start looking for family history. So as I mentioned, you have till December 2021. You can still use it from your own devices, your cell phone, your laptop, computer. But one of the ways that you can save is in the top right corner. So when I brought up that birth record, you'll see a green button in the corner that says save the information. It will give you the option to save as a PDF or a JPEG. Either is fine. Prefer JPEG if you're saving things. Also, you can use a screenshot or a snipping tool on your computer if you feel comfortable with that. And then I also provided a link below. It's how to send documents from the library on Ancestry, and it's a video how-to. It talks you through it, and it shows you examples of how to save everything and save everything correctly. So that way, when you go home, you can open them and it doesn't have a corrupt file or it didn't save correctly. So more information that I recommend. These are some great sources. So some of them are, using directories to find your female ancestor, the National Women's History Museum. And then also, this is again the list of every immigration port in the United States from 1820 to 1957. That will be very helpful in finding those records for you. Once you find the immigration records, you'll be able to find out what city or town they came from and what country. It will hopefully also give you, their birth information, and then you can easily take that to the civil registrations or the vital records of that area and then bring them up. Also, if they happen to travel with anyone, it will tell them that. So if they traveled with a sister or a husband or a parent, you know, you'll be able to see that too, and you'll get that information as well. And then I also included the family US naturalization records. So if you wondered once they came over, what's the next step? When were they naturalized? Sometimes you might actually find on the marriage certificate, it will say whether or not they are a US citizen at the time of marriage. So that's also another thing to look at for marriage records. Another is Facing History and Ourselves. I love this resource. This one is really good if you are looking up ancestors who have been marginalized, because it is kind of like here's how we're facing the history, and here's how that group is going forward with it, and these are the resources they're using. You probably won't find it as useful if you're white and European history or family origin. But another one is name origins. I am a sucker for finding out what names mean. As from the beginner's genealogy, I talked about the name origins and different name spellings. It's a great thing to get into because you can also find out, oh, that name is, you know, of an Irish origin, and then maybe that gives you clues of where to start. As I always say, go to your local library. It's always a great resource. We also have the Framingham room in the main library downtown that you can use. And then there's other sites that you can use that also offer free research tools without a membership, which is always nice. And then here are some book titles we do recommend. You can order these today through the Minuteman catalog. Most of them are available at the Framingham Library downtown or the McAuliffe branch, also in Framingham. Two that I want to point out is the Mastering Genealogical Proof. As I mentioned, sources are everything with, you know, your research. This is a great way to make sure you know how to verify those sources, that it came from somewhere, you know, that someone didn't just fake upload it. And then also is the first one, the Everything Guide to Online Genealogy, the Trace to Your Roots, Share Your History, and Create Your Family Tree. This is great if you plan on doing like the next step further of maybe getting like a paid subscription to a site that you can digitize everything. It's also great because then you can just digitally save to that person's profile. But it's also a great resource of just some of the beginner basics. Do want to point out our next genealogy is Advanced Genealogy on October 18th. So you'll be able to register for that in sometime next month. We'll be posting the links for that. In this one, we're kind of covering like a mixed bag of some harder topics. One of the things I know some people asked last time about adoption, and that is kind of a tricky subject, so we'll be getting more into that in this next one. We also are going to have a special guest from the Framingham History Center on local genealogy and how to find ancestors and family right here in Framingham. So that would be a great treat for us. And then we're also doing a brief overview on DNA test kits. We are going to cover a few other things, but I would love to know whether you guys put in the chat or if you guys take the survey, what you want to see and or what you're most stuck at when you're doing family research. Like, what's the one thing that you're like, I don't know how to get past this. And those are some of the things we're going to try and cover. That is